Hi everyone, happy Wednesday. We are finally back doing our Wednesday Q&As. Today we want to talk about something that's been kind of a buzz. Actually, I don't know when it actually was aired, but it's the whole Jillian Michaels interview that she did with, I think it's Steve Harvey. Is that his name, on the Steve Harvey show? And I actually had several people reach out to me and say, hey, check this out. What do you think about this? This is completely opposite from what you guys have been talking about and how you've been so pro keto and stuff like that. So fortunately we have Chad here to answer these questions, and we went back and looked at the interview she did with Steve Harvey, and we noticed that there were these kind of false statements being made. And so today we're gonna address some of those and just kind of clear it up a little bit for you. So the first thing she was asked was, what's changed the most over the years with diets and stuff? And she was asked that question by Steve Harvey, and her response to that was, quote, diet and nutrition they're just fads reskinned. So all these things that are changing all the time, the new fad, the new diet, it's just a fad reskinned. What do you say about that?
Well, there is a lot of diets that get cycled through and they get renamed, like the South Beach diet and the Zone diet, and there's so many different diets out there that do get renamed by authors or get renamed that probably have been in existence and been recommended at some point. So I think there's some truth to that. But oftentimes, and I think she made this comparison, that basically the ketogenic diet is just reskinned name of the Atkins diet. And it's really not. If you go back to the original recommendations by Atkins, and first of all, Atkins was revolutionary at the time, and many of the concepts have been maintained in the ketogenic diet. But there's lots of ways that we've understood now over the past 30, 40 years since he originally came out with the Atkins diet. We've learned a lot. We've learned what to do, and we've learned what not to do. And really, the kind of ketogenic diet that we're talking about is a well-formulated ketogenic diet. And this really comes out of the work of Jeff Volek out of Ohio State University. You can look up his stuff. He's got great books, excellent research. I've read all of his papers. One of his writing partners is Stephen Phinney, PhD. They're both PhDs. Stephen Phinney is also an MD, PhD. Really, really brilliant guys. I think they have a blog even. It's called Virta, V-I-R-T-A, health blog, I think. So you can just Google that and find that information. This is the kind of program that we're talking about. This is the kind of ketogenic diet that we prescribe, because there's lots of crappy ketogenic diets. Oftentimes we call it sloppy Atkins. And there are definitely some sloppy Atkins diet where you eat like burgers and bacon all day long. That is not sound, healthy food. We're talking about, in fact, we created something called the Keto Med Project. And actually what we're doing with that, and I'm not trying to promote that, but it's a combination of the ketogenic diet and the Mediterranean diet. And what we're picking the kind of the best aspects of both of those. And I'm bringing that up to make the point that vegetables are very, very important in a well-formulated ketogenic diet. So that's really what we're taking from the Mediterranean diet, which has massive studies, and they're very consistent, showing that the Mediterranean diet is super healthy. But we've eliminated certain things from the Mediterranean diet that we think are generally not healthy for most people. But for the most part, vegetables need to be the centerpiece, along with healthy oils, which are heavily featured. If you actually look at the Mediterranean diet, it's very high in fat. Olive oil, avocado oil, and avocados and olives, super, super healthy, high quality fat. But what is eliminated from kind of the sloppy Atkins is the protein. It's way too much protein. We've learned a lot from protein over the last several decades, and a well-formulated ketogenic diet is low carb, moderate protein, and high fat.
Okay, so just to clarify, because she was super cynical about how keto's just the Atkins diet that was in the 80s, her mom did it and whatever. So the big difference is the ketogenic diet is just implementing that good healthy fat that was missing in maybe the Atkins. Just the Atkins was heavily heavy protein and not the good healthy fat.
Well, they promoted fat, but yeah, they certainly didn't talk about what's the difference between a healthy fat, unhealthy fat.
Right.
At least that's not what was really emphasized. But yeah, the quality of the protein we spend a lot more attention on today than was done decades ago, because we know that, feedlot beef fat is very inflammatory. And we know that, grass-fed, grass-finished beef fat is very anti-inflammatory. So the quality of the animal protein is something that we strongly emphasize and is vitally important, because you can be inflamed from eating beef if you're choosing the wrong kind of unhealthy beef. Or you can your body can be in a state of anti-inflammation if you choose high quality grass-fed, grass-finished type beef. So the quality of the protein is also something that needs to be considered.
Well, and I think that's another one we need to do, because I saw a good article on social media that talked about grass-fed is different than grass-finished, and we've talked about that. I mean, Chad and I have before, but that's another good one to share. Something I want to talk about, because I think this is like an old school mentality, and I was the same way. Like, I really, really relied heavily on exercise in the past. And I thought if I ran 10 miles or 6 miles, whatever, the more exercise I did, regardless of what I ate, that's when I was living off of carbs, that would help with my weight loss or fat loss. And Jillian Michaels has that same mentality still, where she said, when it comes to health, 2 + 2 will always equal 4. It's an equation. Eat less and move more. So what do you say about that? That is such an old school mentality, and it's hard. It's kind of like we're having a hard time consuming more fat when we live that, is all about fat free. So this is another one of those things that we got to switch our thought about that.
Yeah, and lots of researchers have had the same thought too, and they've put this information to the test. And the calorie counter kind of theory of weight loss has been just completely debunked. So the concept goes that, let's say, just for easy math, that you typically consume 2,000 calories per day. So let's say you drop your calories down to 1,500 calories. So it creates basically a caloric deficit. The hope is that your body starts to use your body fat as the difference to make up that 500 loss of calories. But that's just been completely debunked. There's been so many studies, very large studies, that evaluated this concept. There's one I'm thinking of that was one of the biggest ones. It's called the Women's Health Initiative Dietary Modification Trial. It was a few years back. It was a 7.5-year study. And here's what they did. They did that. They encouraged increase of exercise, decrease your fat intake, and decrease your calories. Okay? Conventional wisdom. And what they learned is that, and they were coached. They had sort of accountability check-ins, and they were coached through the process of how to actually make this happen practically. And the women followed it. So these were women that were in their 50s and 60s. The average weight was 169 pounds. They had a body mass index of 29.1, which puts them overweight. So it's a great group to evaluate. And so what they looked at, and this was 50,000 women, and this study was funded by the National Institutes of Health. So it's a very high quality study. And it was over a very long period of time, 50,000 women, 7.5 years. And they learned that the women stuck to this actually pretty well. They definitely decreased their fat intake significantly. They exercised more, and their calories went down. When they did all the calorie counting, it really mapped out. And here's what they found out. Over the first year, it was pretty successful. They lost, on average, about 4 pounds. Okay? So we go 4 pounds. That's pretty good. What about year 2? Year 2, that 4 pounds was erased.
And so low fat, low cal, and then exercising more.
And they maintained this. Year 1, on average, they lost about 4 pounds. Year 2, the weight actually crept back up to their prior study weight of, remember, an average about 169 pounds, BMI 29.1. And then year 3, year 4, so let's just fast forward to year 7.5, 7.5 years into it, there was exactly no difference between the control group, which didn't do any modifications to their diet, and the group that did all the dietary modifications and exercise. In other words, it was a massive failure. It didn't work.
Why though? Why is that?
Here's what's not taken into account in the whole calorie counting theory of weight loss is hormones. It's not at all a calorie thing. It's completely fat loss. And let's say, the researchers refer to it as fuel partitioning, meaning is fat being used as energy or is fat being stored? Mm-hmm. This is completely dependent upon hormones, not calories.
Hormones like?
Well, lots of hormones, but at the very top of that hormonal pyramid is by far insulin. Insulin is the gatekeeper that is involved in energy partitioning. In other words, is the fat being used as energy, or are we in a fat storage situation? And by just taking calories up and down, that does not dictate at all. It doesn't influence the balance of insulin.
Well, I can say, and you can attest, I used to run marathons all the time, mostly half marathons, but I was putting in so much exercise and mileage a week, and definitely wasn't, I was carbo loading, but I wasn't, my carbs were down, definitely fat, because that was like, you didn't touch fat then. And I certainly didn't look like a marathon runner. So I do think that that's interesting that you say that. And now fast forward to what I do, I exercise less. I consume way more fat. My calories are probably okay, but I certainly don't feel like I deprive myself, and I've lost way more fat than I ever have. So I think it's just a retraining of our brain. And I think women were the worst at like, oh my gosh, what? You're telling me to eat fat? I can't drink that in my coffee when there's 12 grams of fat in it. So I think, our goal in doing these videos and stuff is just kind of re-educating, giving you the information, and then you make your own informed decision or what's going to work for you.
Well, it's pretty clear that Jillian has no concept of the hormonal contribution to fat burning and fat loss. Because if you do it the way that probably she does it, as we all witnessed in The Biggest Loser, what happens is they massively restrict their calories, okay? Because this is what conventional wisdom says, eat less and then exercise more. But here's what happens in reality is when we drop our calories by, let's say, 30%, we drop our calories by 30%, guess what happens with our energy expenditure? Our energy expenditure is the amount of calories that we burn by just our daily activities. They've tested this over and over and over again. If you drop your calories that are coming in by 30%, your calories going out, guess what? Also drop by 30%. Your calories in and your calories out are completely dependent variables. They're not independent variables. So when you eat less, you're gonna move less. When you eat less, you're going to move less. Unless what? Unless you have somebody screaming at you, browbeating you into another rep, another exercise. It takes that kind of effort. If you're already restricting your calories, your brain and body want to slow down because you just removed a bunch of calories. It requires somebody screaming at you to exercise in order to make you do that. How natural is that? And how sustainable is that? It's completely unsustainable. They've done studies where they track people from The Biggest Loser years later, and they've gained all their weight back and then some. And anybody who understands hormones would have predicted that because it's hormonally based. The calorie in, calorie out, and exercise your way to fat burning has just been debunked.
Well, I heard you can't exercise your way out of a bad diet. And so for me, this was freeing because I always relied so much on exercise for sure. But isn't it true that, well, I think this is actually pretty freeing because isn't it true that exercise only accounts for about, 15% of weight loss, whereas 85% is really your diet. And I see people exercising their buns off and exercise, but I feel like there is the nutrition piece that is missing to really get them the results that they're really seeking and looking for.
Well, the nutrition piece, but the hormonal piece is missing. And there's ways to help to influence the hormones to cause fat burning in the system. But when we exercise or when we calorie restrict, which kind of has the net effect of the same thing, that you're decreasing your overall calories for the day. What happens when you do that is hormones kick in the system. Hormones like ghrelin go up, and that tells you that you're hungry. Hormones like leptin get suppressed, which tell you that you're full. Insulin starts kicking in the system because your body needs more fuel. And so we can't deny those hormones. You can white knuckle through that kind of process for a week or 2 or 3. If somebody's really screaming at you, maybe you can handle 4, 5, 6 weeks of this, but it's just completely unsustainable. It's just not going to last. Who's this over here? That's the real genius. It's just not going to last forever. It's just impossible to override these hormones forever. In fact, this was a cool study. They put people in a functional MRI unit, fMRI, which basically allows the electricity of the brain to be evaluated. Are you laughing?
There we go. Well, another study, but
so here's what happened: is these are people that were in a calorie restricted state, like is oftentimes recommended for fat loss, and then they gave them a food stimulus. It was like a visual thing or like a smell thing, some kind of food stimulus, and then they evaluated what part of the brain became active. Here's what was interesting: is the part of the brain of cognition and emotion turned on, and the executive of the brain, the boss of the brain, the parent of the brain, actually turned down. So what the net effect is, the emotion part of the brain is saying, I need to eat, and boss, I'm not going to listen to you. So the boss of the brain, which would try to override that, like, hey, don't eat that because we're trying to be calorie restricted, gets shut down. And so the net effect is hormones are going to kick in, and they're going to do their job. And there's very little that you can do about that.
Well, I think when you restrict yourself from anything, we've talked about that, whether you restrict your kid from forbidding, like you may not have that. It's human nature. You want it more. On the record, Chad and I don't follow a strict ketogenic diet, and we don't restrict ourselves from anything. I mean, how would you explain our diet quickly? Because I know we got to go.
Well, I definitely restrict myself from, I really don't eat I eat no refined grain foods. I have a little bit of rice. We have some sweet potatoes.
You have chips every once in a while if we have chips and salsa, but he's
it's
really
rare.
good. I
on a regular, I really don't. I mean, totally gluten-free, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I definitely don't follow a standard American diet by any means. We only eat whole foods. We don't.
Well,
we
I'm
eat
not
very
saying
little
that, but we
processed.
certainly don't follow a ketogenic diet where we're tracking our macros. That's what I mean.
Yeah, it's rare that our carbohydrates are down between 30 and 50 grams per day, which is what is really required. I'd say we have a low carbohydrate, high fat, medium protein, but maybe not so low. There might be days where we're ketogenic, but for the most part, it's low, carbohydrates, certainly, consistently.
Right, and the carbs we're getting, because most food does all food have a carb value?
No.
Well, so I make a ginormous salad every night, or we're eating some kind of veggies, so we're getting a lot of our carbs through that. But
is there any other key points to make?
No. No, we just wanted to come. I mean, we don't choose to follow the diet to get into ketosis. We use other, exogenous ketones to do that, but we definitely.
Intermittent fasting is another excellent
huge
tool that we use daily, at least 5 days a week, I'd say.
I intermittent fast every day, so that's been a game changer too. But anyways, we just wanted to bring this up because we had a lot of people contacting us about it, and so hopefully that clears it up a little bit, and we probably rambled a little bit too much, but good to be back, and we will be back next week talking about another topic.
See ya.
Bye.